in general, like the whole theme of this is that people are going to die around the world, and many people in the United States don't really care because they don't see these people. But it is heartbreaking because we have the resources, we have the food in the warehouses, we had all of these skills, and now it's just been wiped off the map.
Hello and welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Jody Chan. I'm the Vice Chair of the International Relations Member-Led Forum at the club, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. We kindly ask that you silence your cell phones for the duration of our program. Also, if you have any questions for our panelists, please fill them out on the cards that were on your seats, and they will be collected from you during the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Karen Klimowski is an international development expert with over 30 years of experience leading U.S. foreign assistance programs across Africa and Asia as a senior USAID Foreign Service officer. She played a key leadership role in the U.S.'s COVID-19 response in India and has managed programs in global health, climate resilience, governance, and crisis response. Brenda Barrett is a democracy and governance specialist with nearly 25 years of experience working with or for USAID. She has designed and led peacebuilding and political stabilization programs in over 25 countries, including Haiti, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, and Tunisia. And to my right, we have Nicole Van Abel. Nicole is a globally recognized environmental scientist and senior advisor with over 20 years of experience in climate resilience, water security, and natural resource management. She most recently served for almost 9 years at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, where she advised and evaluated climate and water programs in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Karen, Brenda, and Nicole, it's wonderful to have you all here, and we are here today to talk about the many changes and cuts to U.S. foreign aid and the future of foreign aid. So let's get started with the first question, which is for all three of you. The shutdown of USAID was not approved by Congress, and it seems it was designed to be done in as traumatic a way as possible for USAID staff, contractors, partners, and the people on the ground that USAID programs were supporting. So to start us off, could you speak to how you or your colleagues have been affected by the shutdown of USAID, as well as what this has meant in terms of impacts in the countries that USAID has worked in? Karen, why don't you start us off, and then we can have Nicole and Brenda come in.
All right. Thank you very much, Jody. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. And I'm glad so many people are in attendance. So thank you for attending. So the impact to USAID, I retired on March 31st. I was assigned domestically in my last assignment as the development diplomat in residence for the Western United States, and I was based here in Northern California, covering the entire Western U.S. I think the executive order came out on January 21st, and I live in Santa Cruz, and I was walking in Capitola wearing a USAID shirt. I was still trying to be proud, even though we were being called corrupt and should be locked up. I was talking
Radical
to
lunatics.
and I was talking to a friend, and someone yelled at me on the street and said, "You're with USAID?" And they said, "You should be locked up, and you are corrupt, and we are going to send the police to your house." This isn't Capitola. I don't know if you all know Capitola, but it's not normal for that kind of reaction. And I think I was so shell-shocked from all the press and media, I didn't know how to respond. I just turned around and walked away. And then I received my first termination notice at the end of January and told to complete my timesheets that I would be fired by April. And then they said, "You will have system access." Then my system access was immediately cut, and I had no access to anything on the system. I told the IT desk and my supervisors, who told me that they know nothing about it and they weren't involved in the RIF or system access, and they couldn't help us. And then I proceeded to receive 3 more termination notices. So I had 4 in total, all with incorrect information. And so that's when I decided I was retiring, because I felt like I could do more on the outside by being able to speak out and write op-eds and speak on panels like this than to stay inside and be further abused. So I did jump ship on March 31st, and I'm very happy about doing that. I have been on panels, I have been talking to press, I have been writing op-eds. I'm just trying to raise awareness about the work we do. around the world. During the same time, my husband was a contractor in South Sudan. And when they cut all the contracts, he was based in the embassy there. That was, South Sudan is very unstable right now, and the president is trying to consolidate all his power and is putting his vice president and others under house arrest. There were gunfire shots going on outside the embassy compound, and tracers were coming over the wall. And when they shut the contracts, they also terminated their fuel contract. Yeah. So they had no fuel coming into the embassy, and they run on generators 24/7, and they live on the compound. They cut the potable water contract at the same time that there was a major cholera outbreak going on in the South Sudan. They cut the food vendor contract. They couldn't leave the compound to get food, but the food vendor was from South Africa. Luckily, they were very nice and said, "We will continue providing you food. We hope we will get paid eventually." They did reverse the contracts within about 5 days and got everything rolling back. But at that time, they were under duck and cover, wearing their gear every day for 4 or 5 times a day. And so my husband would call me. So it was pretty traumatic during that time. And then not to mention the impact on the countries that we're living. I'll just quickly do some stats. I don't know if you're familiar with the impactcounter.com. It is a website that is tracking the impact of the cuts of the funding discontinuation around the world. Right now, it's estimated that there's 103 deaths per hour, with a total of 116,000, more than 116,000 adult deaths and almost 250,000 child deaths since the federal assistance has been cut. And then the loss of trust in countries where we worked. I had an NGO in Uganda that I worked with who reached out saying, "Do you think we're going to get paid?" And I said, "I hope so." And their response was, "But you're the U.S. government. You always pay your bills." And this was a clinic that ended up closing because they couldn't keep going with not receiving the assistance provided by the federal government. So I'll leave it at that for now, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen.
So I'm Nicole, and I was an institutional support contractor at the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. That means I got a stop work order on January 28th at noon and was told I was not allowed to work anymore. And my last timesheet was due on January 31st. I had to use my paid time off to finish out the timesheet so I could get a full paycheck. And then I was done and kicked out of the system. I also lost my health insurance. So on January 31st, my company did not grant us an extension and allow us to be fired in February. Yeah, I received my last paycheck in January. I get no severance. I get no administrative leave. I got nothing because I was a contractor. In BHA, we run on contractors of different varieties. Probably 75% of our staff are contractors. So with all the stop work orders and freezing of foreign assistance, we lost all of our staff, which meant that they're the people who do all the paperwork. In the media, it was reported that nothing was being stopped from humanitarian assistance. All that was allowed to keep going. I'm here to say that was a lie. Most of that stuff was shut down. Some of it was restarted, but often it wasn't able to be restarted easily because staff were gone. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do the paperwork. People were locked out of all of the financial systems. And so a lot of work just froze. And then if you were lucky, some of your work carried on. I'm wearing a shirt that's for the disaster assistance response teams. They all were called back to the United States. Everybody was called back from being overseas. Some people had help getting home, but I can report that some contractors were stranded overseas and had to use frequent flyer miles to get back. Because with the termination of the contracts and the freezing of foreign assistance, that meant that the travel agents couldn't get paid and they could not help you to book a ticket to get back home. Within BHA, we had a bunch of our programs shut down. Some of them did restart. That meant that life-saving assistance couldn't go to many of the countries that we work in all over the world. This also means that all of the food got stuck in the warehouses. I'm sure some of you saw some of the articles about all the pounds of food that were languishing and are still languishing in the 5 warehouses we have pre-positioned food around the world. We also meant that there was a shutdown of the production of therapeutic foods for severely acute malnourished children in the United States. There was a plant in Georgia that was shut down, and another one in another part of the country. They were eventually reinstated, but these disruptions cause effects farther down. So it was all just a huge mess. But ultimately, about 90% of BHA was gone. There are still a few people hanging on, but they're doing the work of like 10, 12, 50, 100 people at this point in time, trying to keep things that are going on, because the people in charge were literally like saying yes or no to decide which countries' programs were going to continue. And so that's leaving them like in a big mess. There was a huge report from the OIG that also said this freeze, $500 million worth of food assistance was stuck at all the ports. So congratulations, we all paid for that, and it's just going to sit there. And the freeze also impacted the ability to vet our partners so that we don't fund violent extremists. We couldn't do that anymore. And we also weren't able to do third-party monitoring to understand if our stuff was going where it was supposed to go. So there were just many, many impacts for us in BHA.
I mean, you saw me nodding a little bit because it's reliving trauma. It's like a car crash that you experience, and you're just like, oh, yep, I remember. So I am Brenda. I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate that so many of you are here. And I have worked for USAID directly as what's called a personal services contractor. So my relationship with USAID and my security clearance and diplomatic passport was with one office, one bureau at the time, and very specific. So I was never a foreign service officer, but more recently I became what's called an implementing partner. And that means that my company that hired me was the person who did the USAID work in the democracy governance field. And so my position was called chief of party. That was most of my work in the past 25 years. However, I was evacuated during the Burma coup in February 2021, and you know, there's a lot of bureaucratic heroes, by the way, whose names and faces you will never know, but who got us out very safely, and I'm grateful to them. I landed in the States, and it was during COVID also. So at the same time, I had to do, we had proof of concept we could do remote work. So I just worked overnight being chief of party for a $54 million project in Burma. With 40 staff after a military coup. And we can talk, I will mention later, and after for a different question, some of the ways that I think USAID could perform, but some of the things that they were doing very well. And that was a great example of how USAID was able to pivot immediately within 24 hours to expand my contract so that I could respond to the needs as they completely changed overnight in Burma at the coup. However, the last 2 years, that project ended. It's natural, end life. And then I was hired by a small woman-owned business based out of DC, and she said, just stay where you are. Here, I'm in Sonoma, it's not the opposite of Capitola, but no one's yet accosted me on the street for wearing my Radical Lunatic t-shirt. But not yet, but after tonight, who knows? And so I would fly to DC, and we would do all this work. And when we saw what was happening with the election, I kind of looked at Project 2025, and I just did this analysis on the development section. And I shared it with the company, and I said, well, this is what they're saying is going to happen. I just can't. Well, there's just no way. There are too many checks and balances. There's just no way this can go down this way. I mean, there's just not possible. January 21st. I get a letter. I'm an institutional, we're an implementing partner of USAID. One of the things that we do is called institutional support. So maybe not the company that hired, someone like Nicole, but we did that. So we seconded people to USAID to do monitoring and evaluation and learning in conflict zones, and then to do different kinds of administrative support in related to conflict and political transition environments. Very dynamic, and I was in charge of security for all that as well. So when all of a sudden I get this letter, and I just can't, I'm like, is this phishing? Am I being phished right now by the Chinese? Because it's saying anyone who's had anything to do with DEIA needs to be put on administrative leave or fired by 5 p.m. today. And I'm in California time, right? So that would have come out so by the time I read it, it's noon in DC. So I only have a couple of hours to figure out what's going on. So I start reaching out to people. And I I have to make this like, okay, I wanted to brief my CEO, and she said, okay, well, we need to get the contracts officer, but they weren't talking to us. Mm-hmm. So we had to make this decision, right, try to do right by people. So the first thing I thought was, I'm going to call these people who may be impacted. One woman, I'll never forget, she was calm. Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to let you handle that. You just let me know. Okay. And then I called her back 2 hours later, and I said, I'm very sorry. This is your last day. Cut up your badge, send back your computer. She was 8.5 months pregnant, African-American woman, lost her job that day, didn't even get more than 2 hours notice. And the writing was on the wall. So the rest of us got the similar notices a couple days later. And we were all out of work. But that's not that's hard. But the hard part was I then, as everyone's sort of in charge boss kind of thing, had to start calling around the world, Syria, Ukraine, Ivory Coast, and say the way that this information is getting interpreted, no one wants to assume the risk of having bills unpaid. The bills had not been paid since November. Also, please remember that. Bills had not been paid since November. Travel that had already occurred under another administration, but after the election they were saying you cannot pay for it. So how many companies, how many families could go how many months without having work performed legally under contracts? And that is not getting reimbursed. That was reimbursable, legally reimbursable. That's what we're still fighting for. So you have the bigger companies could withstand some of that, absorb some of that. Say they riffed and furloughed a bunch of people immediately, but the smaller companies had to make very, very bold decisions very quickly or go completely insolvent. So I knew what was going to happen, but before my very last day, all I was just trying to make sure my people got paid, and I was calling people, in Syria, and it was hard not to cry in the moment. I did later because I had to listen to people say their lives are at risk now because we had convinced them to convince Syrian farmers to donate the equivalent of $40,000 so we could do a matching grant for them for a livelihoods assistance program in northern Syria. And our role primarily was to get women involved in that so they could be a part of the economy. And we wouldn't pay our bills and we wouldn't meet that. And so now these farmers who ponied up $40,000 were threatening our staff on the ground. That I have 5 stories like that. And you're trying to explain how it is possible that the US government is not honoring the very most basic sort of legal contracts that we had, to say nothing of our moral contract with the rest of the world. So anyway, that was January. And as of February 1st, like you, I've been speaking out, and it's unpopular, but I know we're over time already on this question, but I just do want to say that the shock and awe and the trauma that they intended to, create, they did. Mission accomplished. They totally traumatized not just the people working in the ecosystem and not just the American businesses and the knock-on effect in America. The most vulnerable people in the entire world, those of whom are still alive today, will not necessarily be alive tomorrow because of what we've done, because of what is being done now. And it's just immoral. It's unacceptable, And I think that I'm pleased that people are still paying attention to this. And one last thing, the New York Times did a really great spread this weekend on this, yesterday and today. And we know a lot of people who are contributing, and it's just crazy how many people are afraid to use their real names to talk about things that really happened because of the fears of reprisal from this administration.
Thanks, Brenda. And yeah, the fear is very real. Okay, my next question is for Brenda and Nicole. A lot of Americans think that a significant portion of the U.S. budget went to foreign aid, when in reality it was less than 1%. Yeah. There is often a misconception that U.S. aid is somehow charity, or that it is an antiquated model for the world we live in today. How would you respond to the view that U.S. aid isn't good value for money, or that foreign aid isn't a good investment for the U.S.? Nicole, let's start with you, and then Brenda can come in.
I guess I would, first of all, say, what is a good value for this type of money in general? What is that question? But as far as it being charity, a little bit of the backstory of the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance was it is started by it comes out of the Office of Food for Peace and the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. The Office of Food for Peace was set up under the Food for Peace Act to actually help American farmers. We produce way too much grain here in the United States, and we needed something to do with it. So the United States came up with this plan to ship this grain and all of these products overseas to help farmers. So we've been doing that since actually before USAID even started. That's how old Food for Peace is. So I'm honestly, part of USAID is actually a charity for farmers in the United States. We spend $2 billion buying grain from American farmers and ship them overseas on U.S. flag carriers. So we also use only U.S. maritime ships. So it is slower than using regular ships because of all the lobbies in the United States. So it is a struggle for me when people think that it is charity, because it has come out, like my work specifically came out of this like idea of also helping the United States. Was it helping the rest of the world? Absolutely. But I would challenge anybody to go to a famine and not want to send everything you possibly could to those poor people. It is horrifying and it is horrible. We had bipartisan support in BHA and in USAID in general, because our programs were seen as helping. Like, an emergency response is so terrible, and you know that the countries can't respond. Even within the United States, until now, we have FEMA. We have somebody who comes and helps us out. And so that's just what we can do overseas, because we have the most money, we have all this power, and it was just a kind thing to do. But also the whole thing also comes out about soft diplomacy. We are in all of these countries and we are doing this work, and people really value it. If you ever rock up in a USAID vehicle, people come out of the woodwork to see you and thank you. And it is so important, because these refugee camps in the midst of a drought, like in the Horn of Africa, are in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing but sand and like dead animals and people living there. And so they get this assistance from the United States, and they are so grateful. And it is wonderful because you are helping people live, but it's also not a stretch to say that it's keeping out the other influences. Now that the U.S. is gone, who's going to step in our place? Probably China. Anytime you go around Africa, who are building the roads? The Chinese. When Myanmar just had their last earthquake, who showed up? China. So the soft diplomacy of the United States is being eroded basically immediately because of everything that has happened. And it's really upsetting, because you could see the value of that work in countries that were fighting extremists and terrorism. Them having the United States there, providing them with stuff, was super valuable and super useful. And it can't be discounted, even though that it is. So, yes, it may be charity, but I am a soft person. I want to just help everyone out, but also the things that it gives us, we aren't going to be able to measure. But if there's some sort of terrorist attack in the United States, there will probably be a direct link to us pulling out of all of these places and other forces coming in. I know it sounds like a bit extreme, but I just don't think that it is when you see these places and these countries and the work that we do.
You know what? I'll pick up on that and just add, first of all, I don't need to add anything, because I feel like that totally conveys how I have experienced it as well. But I will just mention that the names of the bureaus and the agency and the offices have changed over time. Everyone wants their news, whatever. I worked mostly in what was democracy, conflict, humanitarian assistance, but it more recently was conflict prevention and stabilization. And my work mostly was with this office that got created in 1994 in the Balkans, where the U.S. government said, hey, we don't really have a tool in our toolbox. This isn't a military issue. This is not an underdeveloped place. This is a political transition. So my work with USAID mostly has been in political transition in countries that are maybe about to sign a ceasefire agreement or have just now signed one. And what can we do to create or hold open that civil society space so that democratic actors can come in, so that real reform can happen? Now, that means inherently it's a really messy, unpredictable environment. You can't really say, okay, here's my 10-year plan or here's my 5-year plan. Most cases, you can't even say, here's my 1-year plan. You just need to know that you have people who are there in the field with the mandate to do the vetting, to help the right people, to try to find out what are the issues that are the most vexing, and in relation to, I will say, misdis, malinformation, and the encroachment in space of violent extremist actors. Like I was working in northern Cote d'Ivoire right before this happened. I was actually just there in September, and when you see how the Russians, first of all, are fueling that in certain parts of Africa, you obviously see the Chinese and how they're in their role. But the Russians are the one who are actively fighting the U.S. in cyberspace in places like West Africa, kind of funneling funds and giving space to Boko Haram, for example, or Jenim. So what happens is you're meeting people who don't really have, even in the United States, we do not have the ability to really parse out what is misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. You have just the person who yelled at you on the street in Capitola is a great example of someone like my aunt and uncle in Omaha when they found out that I worked for USAID for 25 years, even though, they know me. And I said, it's me they're talking about. Oh my God, you worked for USAID. I said, you know me. This is bananas. I cannot believe that you are believing this stuff. Well, I mean, so if we can't do it, can anyone who's never had any formal education but has access to WhatsApp or YouTube and see AI generated whatever? So there is a war happening. It's been happening. And we have ceded that space that we filled and just said, okay, here's the vacuum of power. Who's going to fill it? It will be Russia. It is Russia. It will be China. It is China. So, I could go on and on, but the point is, I think that USA did a lot of very important things around the country, most of which people wouldn't ever know or talk about. The famines and the humanitarian assistance, it makes you feel good, but when you're in my space, democracy, governance space, you get criticized for how much of USAID comes back to America. I have been criticized by so many people in America, a lot of Europeans. 80% of our aid comes back to the United States in the forms of the companies that hire these people, the food to the farmers, the Americans who work, kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that's money misspent or not spent very well. The purpose is it's an enormous undertaking, and you need a lot of oversight, and you need a lot of the regulatory environment is such that you need to be accountable legally for everything you do, which is why you can't give away old computers because they might break down and you'll get criticized. Instead, you have to destroy them, film you destroying them, and then send that back, those are the kinds of reforms that I would argue later that we need to make, that we could have made. Those kinds of things seem very dumb. But the point is, 80% of that money came back to the United States. And so this wasn't about, yes, it was about helping other people, and other people were helped, but the way the ecosystem operated with the level of sophistication and accountability that was needed, again, there could be improvements for sure. But this was not just about giving condoms for Gaza. And by the way, I think everyone in this room will know that was Mozambique.
Gaza, Mozambique. Not the Gaza Strip.
Not the Gaza Strip.
A project started by George W. Bush.
Correct.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Bill Gates did a great job explaining that also in one of his interviews recently. So happy to have that ally.
Okay, I'm coming to you, Karen. A priority for USAID was supporting the global health supply chain system. So whether this was supporting health clinics, antiretrovirals for AIDS, Ebola medication, other medical supplies. So I have a two-part question for you. One, could you share a couple examples from your experience on the ground about the critical support that USAID provided to local health systems? And two, what are the implications for those countries as well as the U.S. now that we don't have USAID playing a key role in global health?
Thank you, Jody. I'm going to answer part of the second part of the second question first because it builds off what Nicole and Brenda were saying, just some history on development as it fits with national security. Post 9/11 in 2002 is when development was elevated within the national security strategy and made a priority. So that was, and it was under the premise that development prevents conflict by addressing the root causes of poverty, exclusion, and injustice. And in the national security strategy, it said, where poverty and injustice persists, the seeds of extremism and conflict grow. And so USAID's work and what Nicole and Brenda just talked about and what I'll mention in the health sector was really looking at improving the socioeconomic and political conditions for global stability. So working on reducing the extreme poverty that Nicole was talking about, and hunger, building resilient and inclusive institutions and supply chains, and really empowering and making local solutions, improving health, education, and economic opportunities to give people hope, right? So we were trying to keep people in the countries, make their lives better on the global scale of hopefully reducing violent extremism and feeling the need and desperation that join those groups to get the money. And so I think, the impact, and I'll talk about the global supply chain, but losing trust and hope is what's happening in the world right now with what Nicole and Brenda just said. Communities feel there is nothing left for them. So I do believe when Nicole just said, I think we're going to see more attacks, I do think that it will bring more instability and recruitment into violent extremist groups. Yep. So on to public health. So that's an impact into some of the stuff we're doing. But so I've worked in numerous countries. Jody said, I've worked in 5 different African countries. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone, which is what got me started on my career in development. And then I worked in Indonesia, the Philippines, and India, as well as Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya, and Uganda. I spent 23 years straight overseas. And my first assignment in the U.S. was this last one as the development diplomat in residence. So obviously, in Africa, we focused a lot on PEPFAR, the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is what, as you just said, President Bush started. It was actually started by Clinton, called the Life Initiative, and then President Bush really upped it and made it PEPFAR. In Kenya, we worked to integrate the health systems. So, and in Zimbabwe, when I first got to Zimbabwe in 2000, there was a street that was called Coffin Row. And it was just a street with coffin makers. And there were coffins everywhere. And you drive by a cemetery, there would be 15 funerals an hour, and you would just see the cemeteries with coffins. In Malawi, we had grandparents taking care of their grandchildren. So people in their 70s, because their children all died and left their grandchildren orphans, you had 70-year-olds taking care of their grandchildren. There was so much deaths. We lost, I think in the first week I was in Zimbabwe, we lost 7 staff members to HIV. So when PEPFAR started, we really worked hard to identify those people with HIV, and HIV/AIDS was a disease of death. You died if you were infected. We worked to test people. We worked to get health systems set up and clinics established to get the antiretroviral drugs to the clinics and to the people that needed them. We trained healthcare workers and nurses so you would have the right people in the right place at the right time to provide health services to those that need it. And over time, what we've seen is that HIV/AIDS has transformed from a disease of immediate death to a chronic disease. You do have to take the ARVs for life, but you can live a full, successful life. The virus load will go down. You're less likely to transmit it if you have antiretrovirals. If you're a pregnant woman who's positive and you're on your ARV treatment, you are less likely to have a baby infected with HIV. So we've seen dramatic increases in the reduction of HIV around the world by providing this life-saving treatment, by really focusing on prevention, by identifying the cases. I think, unfortunately now, and I'll just use Kenya as an example, 1.3 million people have access to HIV treatment at this time. We spent about $8 million in Kenya since $8 billion in Kenya since PEPFAR started in 2005. And I think now what we're seeing is that with the supply chain stopped, U.S. aid was the catalyst for providing funding for our implementing partners and our government agencies that we partnered with to get ARVs into countries, to set up the pharmacy, set up inventory systems, have the supply chain going, and there's been a disruption of ARVs. Marco Rubio said in a testimony on the Hill that these programs are going. They are not. If you check in countries and you talk to people, ARVs are not being delivered. So there is an interruption in treatment for people on ARV. That leads to more drug resistance. So the ARV drugs that we have will fail, and we will have to invest in getting a whole new round of ARV drugs introduced to help suppress the virus and keep people alive. Reagents, lab supplies, test kits, people knowing their status. One of the biggest barriers, if you don't know your status, you're not preventing the infection from being passed because you don't know you're negative if you're not sick. You may be infected, but you're not showing symptoms and you don't know it. You are passing HIV on. Mm-hmm. So if we can prevent it, we can stop the virus from spreading. And so I think that's some of the impact of the work that's happening of the stop orders. I'll quickly mention also tuberculosis control in India. Yeah. India is the highest burden country in the world for the number of TB infections. It contributes to 28% of all TB infections globally. So that's a lot. And with TB, we had robust programs. Prime Minister Modi had the goal of eliminating TB by 2025. The global UN goal was 2030 to eliminate TB worldwide. India was on track to not eliminate it by 2025, but potentially by 2030. We were partnering on bringing in TB drugs. The USAID funded worked on their development side and tested a new TB drug that was released to the market, the first TB drug in 30 years released to the market, which was funded by USAID, and that was to treat extremely drug-resistant TB, and that is tuberculosis that fails on any other treatment. And so if you are failing on treatment in an active TB case, you can spread TB. Disease knows no boundaries. And so the work that we were doing is really stopping the global spread of an infectious disease. We had a really cool program in India where we partnered with an AI company, a technology company, to develop an app that using AI, you cough into the app, and that app will analyze your cough and come up with the predictability of you having an active TB case. And people were scared of AI. That app ended up being 96% accurate in predicting TB just by coughing into your cell phone. So it was innovation to really work to eliminate TB. If we could get every country in the world using that app and then getting referred to a hospital for confirmation and get on drugs, we can eliminate TB by 2030. The Indian government was going to use their money to scale up that app, so they would use it across the now most populated country in the world. They surpassed China to 1.6 billion people. And that can really have an impact. Unfortunately, now with the disruption in funding, the programs are cut. We are hoping the Indian government continues to scale up that app because that will be a game changer. We're hoping all of the capacity building that we did in countries, in African countries for PEPFAR and with our TB control work in India, that capacity building was institutionalized and these programs will be sustained. There will be we're seeing some of the global supply chain just disruption of getting drugs, but hopefully we've built resilient programs that can bounce back, but it can really, with the global health side, there's a risk of diseases spreading, and hopefully we will not have another COVID on our hands if Indian avian influenza spreads.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Karen. This next question is for Nicole and Karen. USAID supported and coordinated with other federal agencies such as the CDC, other countries, and other development partners like the UN and UN agencies to respond to crises and humanitarian disasters, ranging from natural disasters to diseases to food insecurity, etc. In your view, what are some of the implications now that USAID is no longer leading or supporting coordination in these spaces? And Nicole, let's start with you.
Well, I worked in food security, so I can pretty confidently say that food insecurity is going to get way worse. In Food for Peace, we had $4 billion as an office to just work on food security worldwide, and that still was not enough. And now the budget has been cut. We are the major donor for food assistance worldwide. BHA was. And that budget has now been slashed. Some of the programs have been approved to go through, but the vast majority of them have been cut. So this is, I was reading about so BHA was a huge funder of the World Food Program. We're the biggest donor to the World Food Program. And because of our abrupt cutting off of funds, the World Food Program is really struggling. They're going to probably have to lay off maybe a third of their staff, draw back all their programming in their countries, and they work in very difficult countries. The mandate of most of the work we had to do in Food for Peace was to work with the most vulnerable people in the lowest 2 quintiles in emergency food assistance and in our development program. So we are working with people that almost no one else works with in the world. Sometimes the Europe works there, the EU may work there, but the money compared to what the US was giving was just a drop in the bucket. So we were really the ones funding all the camps, IDP and refugee camps, and doing all the food assistance for places where we had also caused the conflict, thinking about Syria and Yemen. That was like where the vast majority of our money was going. We had huge programs, really long disaster responses that have been going on for sometimes a decade. So food security is going to get way worse because we have stopped sending most of our food around the world, and it's just sitting there. And so we won't be able to address that. Also, the Famine Early Warning System network has been down. It only came up like a few weeks ago. That predicts where all the food insecurity is happening in the world so we could position the food properly. That was down for many months due to the freeze of foreign assistance, so we weren't able to predict where anything was going to happen. We haven't been paying attention. So when that guy said, maybe it was Elon Musk, maybe it was someone else said that no one would die, he's absolutely wrong. People are already dying when we were providing food assistance because the amount of kilocalories that we provide per day is pretty small in general, and now it's down to 0. So also because BHA has been so drastically cut, we cannot respond to a disaster. We've seen that with the earthquakes that have happened since January. The U.S. cannot respond. We sent 3 people to Myanmar who were promptly fired when they got on the ground.
Literally in a tent.
Yeah, they were literally in a tent on the ground.
At the earthquake site.
And they got fired. Yeah. So we normally send an entire team. We're talking 20, 30, 40 people. They know how to get the search and rescue teams there. They know how to get everything there quickly. They have safety and security. We sent 3 people. China filled in the void on that one, probably because it's Asia. I imagine other countries will do that as well. But we are not going to be able to respond. And we have spent decades building up this, the skills to do this. We are all trained. We take 1 million trainings for how to be on a disaster assistance response team, for what to do. I mean, from medical training to like how to be an information officer, how to do all these different things. And all of that is gone. Most of those people are not being transferred to State Department. State Department has no capacity to do this, from my understanding. So
100%.
Yeah. So, okay. So, concurrence that they do not have this capacity. So, we will not be able to respond in that capacity anymore. So, I mean, in general, like the whole theme of this is that people are going to die around the world, and many people in the United States don't really care because they don't see these people. But it is heartbreaking because we have the resources, we have the food in the warehouses, we had all of these skills, and now it's just been wiped off the map. And food security will just continue to get worse, also because of climate change. I'm a water security person. I've worked in agricultural production of food for my entire career at USAID, and the droughts are getting worse, and the farmers want skills. They want access to drought-resistant seeds. We've been working on all kinds of technologies in BHA to help them get more crops and do different things. And all of that is gone, and they won't be able to access us, the seed systems we've developed. I mean, that sounds like a very niche thing, but when you learn about drought-tolerant, resistant seeds and the capacity that they have to grow food, and now they're all gone and they won't be able to buy them because it's only available in the capital and they live 100 kilometers away, but there is no road. All of these things are gone now because they just stopped all of the programming and all of the innovation and all of the work. So my overall thing will be food security is going to get worse and people will die.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would say I'm going to talk a little bit globally. So the coordination across the U.S. government agencies and other bilateral and multilateral donors. Nicole did a great job at just describing all the training and how fantastic our DART teams are. We are seen as the global leaders, and we lead on the ground. So without USAID there, I think we're going to see fragmented efforts across the ground. We're going to see duplication across the U.S. government and across other agencies because we truly coordinated on the ground and said, we're doing this, we're doing that. What are you bringing to the table? What are you? And we got everything moving. And our State Department colleagues, as good as they are, they will not be able to respond as a DART team, nor are they have that level of coordination. They do it on the diplomacy side, but not on the ground in development. So I think we'll see some more fragmented efforts, and I think we'll see some duplication of work and more stepping on toes in some of the global responses, whether they're man-made or natural. I think we are already seeing a reduction in U.S. influence in the global humanitarian assistance architecture. Globally, we've lost our soft power, which I think both Nicole and Brenda said earlier. We have always been a key player in shaping policies on the ground when it comes to any of this work. We're not there. So we are going to see an eroding of our leadership in that soft power and influence on policies and regulations. Both of them just mentioned a shift in leadership to other countries. We've already seen the People's Republic of China, PRC, and Russia moving in to fill the gap and void where we once were that leader, and that was what happened in Myanmar. I think China sent in 3 full plane loads where we sent 3 people.
$2 million also. They pledged $2 million.
Yeah.
3 people, and then they got fired when they were there.
So we're going to see that leadership shifted to others, and I think we'll see more countries around the world then starting to partner, or we'll see more of the predatory development that happens, like the port in Sri Lanka, where countries accept loans from China government after a natural disaster or man-made disaster, and they default on these loans, which is what happened in Sri Lanka with the Hanada port. And the Chinese, it's now the largest port in the world on the major supply chain shipping line. All ships around the world go right by Sri Lanka to get to get anywhere, and now, to get to China and the Gulf, and now China owns the port because Sri Lanka defaulted on it. And so I think we'll see more of that as our power erodes. We're going to see the diminished partner trust and collaboration that I had previously mentioned, where people aren't trusting the U.S. anymore. We're not going to have a seat in that table to influence. And let's see, erosion and harm to local and regional systems, I think. We've spent a lot of time in building capacity in countries, of trying to get the countries to be able to fund and run their own programs. So we're providing that technical assistance or the innovations, and then asking the countries to invest or get other people to invest, so it's not a dependence on the U.S. government. And I think we're going to see an eroding of a lot of the innovation and technology that we work so hard, and the capacity building for the sustainability and continuation in countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to you, Brenda. If you could wave a magic wand and either double down or change something about how USAID operated, either in terms of internal processes or how USAID worked on the ground, what would that be?
Yeah, anyone who worked for USAID knows that lots of things could be reformed. There was, you could create a lot more efficiency by, doing a variety of things, very technical things, but procurement reform is a good example of that, right? I mean, you've had different administrators and different presidents, all under whom I've served proudly. However, you do see some people who want to take this, I want to approve every single decision approach, which really slows things down, right? So you have like a billion or $5 billion worth of, procurements that have been vetted, and technical evaluations committees have been convened, sometimes sequestered. I mean, the most formal process in the whole entire world. Then an award is made, and then someone protests the award who lost, and then everything stops. Oh gosh, we have to start. And then in the meantime, what do you do? Like that kind of thing could be there. A lot of smart people could take 20 minutes and figure out how we can improve that kind of system to make things more efficient, so that we don't kind of fall back on these other slower ways of doing things. I mean, I come from the OTI school within the USAID family, not exclusively, but predominantly. And I've seen the model work so well when you have the ability to be flexible in contracting. The Burma example I'll give you that I alluded to before, when the coup happened, and again, I remember that weekend. I remember calling my headquarters saying, people are talking about a coup. It won't happen. The military already has what it wants. It's not going to happen. But if it does, all comms are going to go down, and I'm going to call you on a sat phone I shouldn't have and is illegal to have, and I hope no one's watching. And when it happens and I get this call, I had people, I didn't have people, but people I knew who were in the room when people were talking would come out of the room and call me and say, "Oh, disaster was avoided." When I went to sleep on that Sunday night, I thought, okay, great, disaster avoided. There will be no coup. And then we were all wrong. I get woken up a couple of hours later. The entire civilian government's been arrested. There was a coup. Comms go down. It's happening. And we had, because of COVID, we had, had established these communication threads, different redundant ways of getting in touch with people. So I reached out to my USAID counterpart immediately. And we rode bicycles. There were protests in the street, and we met at this place in public, and we decided, okay, this is how we're going to have to do it. But I said, my contract, says XYZ, you're going to have to modify the contract. Let's say that conversation happened at 11 a.m. It was modified by 2 p.m. And that's when you have people and you have political will and you have the support of the mission director and whatever, everyone rowing in the same direction. So by 3 p.m., I could provide assistance to democracy activists on day one of the coup. So that kind of reform is needed. Some of it is only psychological, right? It's only people within USAID understanding that that is totally possible to do, but it means you have to trust your people who know what they're doing. And I think there's a reticence sometimes in the system to kind of trust that you can make a decision in India that you would never make in Zimbabwe. And so why are they so different? Well, the circumstances are different. The trajectories in these situations are different. But if I trust that you're doing the right thing, and you are too, it doesn't have to be the same. The approach doesn't have to be the same to try to achieve the same impact and outcome later. One last thing. I think we've failed miserably at demonstrating impact in our work, both in the countries where we work and then to the American people. And some of that, USAID was not allowed to talk about and spend money on domestic soil. So even with like public information campaigns or something, right? There is probably a way it ought to have been done better, but because we've all said we had bipartisan support on the Hill forever, like it didn't matter who was in office, everyone, and it didn't feel necessary. The appropriators understood the value. Any one of us who were in the field dealing with congressional delegations, they saw the value of it. So it didn't feel very important to have to just justify to my Uncle Bob in Omaha, what it is I actually do after getting out of Peace Corps, by the way. I see your pen. Yeah, I was in the Peace Corps too. So I think we ought to do more, because these stories I'm learning today too, right? And the one last thing I said, this is really the one last thing. When you're in country, and I'm in democracy and governance, and maybe you're in health and you're in HA, we don't even necessarily talk to each other, right? We don't even necessarily share what we're doing in our work there. And very often, I think that there's just always been a missed opportunity, that I think there's a way to engineer it so that isn't the case. You can be more effective, achieve greater impact with even, fewer resources.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, I have one last question before we open it up to questions from the audience. So this is for all three of you. I think many audience members here may be wondering what they can do to support and raise visibility about the importance of foreign aid and international development. In your opinion, what are the key one or two things that people can do to support international development as a sector or a particular global need? And let's start with you, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you all for attending, because that's one thing you can do. Raising awareness, learning, and then countering the misinformation that is out there. There is so much misinformation. I use every opportunity now to educate as much as I can. I would not walk away from that person that yelled on me at the street today, but in January it was just too raw. And advocate with your officials. I have had meetings with both Senators Padilla and Schiff. I have my representative is Jimmy Panetta. He has been fantastic. I have met with him numerous times. I just had breakfast with Sam Farr, who's the former assembly member. He still has influence on the Hill. We had breakfast in Carmel. He said to me, if I was still in Congress, USAID would be here. Yeah. I am working behind the scenes. So don't discount anybody that you don't know who they have influence with or where their reach will be. Speak up, write op-eds. Another thing that I'm doing now that I'm lucky enough to do is Cal State Long Beach hired me to teach a graduate seminar in their Masters of International Affairs program. So I am focused on young people and trying to also educate young people on public service, on U.S. government, on the work that we do to motivate them and understand democracy and what's happening in the United States right now. So any opportunity that you have to reach out to anybody that may not be aware, just educate, and communicate and outreach.
Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. I couldn't agree more. I would only add that, from what else I could add is that this is a coup. What has happened here is a coup, and let's call it what it is. And I understand, especially up here in Northern California, or some part, of this part of Northern California, that people kind of, they understand very well what's happening. And I think that people are doing their very best to stay informed, to follow the right, news channels, and to kind of, fight back, so to speak. And when it comes to those conversations, when people are spewing just, blatant misinformation or disinformation. But okay, so beyond that, still do that. I think what I've started to do is work on, besides writing op-eds, it's also working with small groups of people where I live, trying to create awareness sessions that are not just too in your face about what's happening, because so many people are nonchalant because it hasn't affected them directly yet. And so many people have a rude awakening coming. I'll give you another example. My son is severely autistic and requires a special school, special transportation, special all the things. So the dismantling of the Department of Education, and then the protections provided by the Office of Civil Rights there, and then the cuts to Medicaid and how it impacts the kids like my son are all very real and relevant for my life and the other families in this situation. So I'm the president of the PTO. I called a meeting. No one wants to get political. And I said, it's too late. It's very political. So I don't care who, I was nicer about it. We all voted how we voted, whatever, but the point is right now, if you do not call your senators, you do not call your reps, you do not raise hell at every opportunity you can, they will win. They will consolidate this coup and it will be over. The slow slide, the very fast slide, actually, the blitzkrieg, this like slide, this terror into where we are today is like we've never seen this before. In other countries where we've worked, you see it happening, you see the way it manifests itself on the day-to-day basis. Where this is going is no different from all the countries you can think of from your poli-sci classes in college and, Latin America in the 1980s or, Burma after the coup, or actually Burma, you name your time in history with Burma. But what it will mean is people die for so many reasons. They will be persecuted, they will be jailed, they will try to silence you, so do not obey in advance. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yes, all those things. I was just going to say the don't obey in advance. We've all been protesting. We have a USAID group. People have been going out together to the groups. One of our colleagues who's in Oakland works with Indivisible. So I go out and I wear my USAID shirt, and many people talk to me, or my hat, because I am often the first person anybody in the Bay Area has met who has been doged. I tell everyone. The wine guy at the wine store by my house knows me because I told him my sad story and said, please sell $12 bottles of wine forever because I make no money. These kinds of things. I've had people talk to me on the Muni and I just tell them everything. And while people are very informed, they haven't met anyone. So they seem shocked that this is happening, but it is happening and it's going to get worse. You don't have to be working in the government to be impacted. So those are all things like just talking to everybody. And the other thing is like not necessarily combating misinformation, but I also have family in the Midwest and the South who say, but we need that money here in the United States. And I always have to say, but it's not either or. It doesn't mean that we can't do stuff overseas because we do stuff here. Now everything's getting cut, so they're not saying that as much, but trying to combat that mindset that it's not like doing work overseas doesn't mean that we were doing less here. Honestly, the money was going to defense. It's $1 trillion now. So our budget was not impacting that, and it never needed to be this either or, and presenting it as that was making it really bad. Those are just the things. But the protesting and the telling everybody I know has been very cathartic. I've met 1 trillion people. And I worked remotely for USAID for 2.5 years, and I've met more people since I've been doged than I met in those 2.5 years, because when you work home alone, you don't meet anyone. Fun fact. So now I talk to everyone, and it's been really great. But it is surprising how engaged people are here, but they haven't yet met anyone. So being the face of that isn't always happy, but it's been good for sharing the story and the message.
Can I add one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
I think what's happening is, of course, what we see is that the public good is trying to be is being outsourced to the private sector. I mean, ultimately, that's part of the goal is break everything, and then it will be fixed by the private sector. There will be a need for the United States government to respond in some form or fashion to some events abroad where we decide it's important, and then there will be nobody left who knows how to do it, and it will, in my opinion, I think, go to the defense contractors. I think we see a very good example of that. This is my own personal opinion, but in Gaza right now, where you have, that's what happens when you do not have professionals who know what they're doing in charge of something like that. And one last thing I would add, right before I got doged, I was working with the Office of Inspector General to do fourth-party monitoring of humanitarian assistance in Gaza and Ukraine. Ukraine would be energy sector, Gaza humanitarian assistance. They came to us to say, can you please design a system that monitors the third-party monitors to make sure that the assistance is going where it needs to go, because these are hyper-political things. And at the time, the assistance to Ukraine in terms of only the energy sector, right? And then Gaza, of course, humanitarian assistance. That is how seriously oversight was taken. At USAID, my entire tenure with USAID, whether I was directly with aid or as an implementing partner, every single dollar we spent of taxpayer money had to be accounted for legally, but also morally, even the court of public perception, right? So the vetting that we had to do for every single dollar, even if someone was not on a sanctions list, but they're just not a really great person, kind of, they own this company, you have to take that into consideration when you make decisions. And now, none of that matters now for the modicum of programs that have been like turned back on and the work that's happening. And that's to say nothing of the disruptions in the supply chain. You saw the example in the New York Times. You have, the food you can get out of a warehouse, but you don't have the transportation to get it to the people who need it. So what good is it? It's still rotting in a warehouse and people are dying.
Thanks, Brenda. Just in closing, thank you to Karen, Brenda, and Nicole for joining us this evening. It was really a pleasure speaking with you. And for more information about upcoming programs at the club or club membership, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org. Thank you.
Thank you.